Okay, well, welcome everybody. We are super excited that you've joined us for our February webinar. As you all know, this is one in a series of webinars focused on interdisciplinary legal representation that we started last May. We were, as you can all remember, really sad not to be together in Denver, Colorado for our second annual or biannual conference on interdisciplinary legal rep. And so our committee decided that we were going to host a webinar series, and this is the fifth in that webinar series, and we will continue to have them until we can be back together. I just wanted to let you all know, though, and I guess I should have said hi, I'm Mimi Laver from the ABA Center on Children's Law, and I've been helping to host these webinars and put them all together. We will be together virtually May 20th and 21st for a parent representation conference. Again, we're sad not to be together in person, but we're happy to announce that we are going to have that conference, and registration will be beginning soon. So keep your eye out on the listserv for the announcement for registration for that conference. As you can see, we already have an active chat, and we are hoping that you will continue to greet each other and talk to our speakers through the chat. Many of you have joined us before, so you know that you have a couple of options. You can chat to everyone, which is what we'd prefer, but you have to make sure that you set it to the everyone drop down. You could also chat just to the panelists. And if you have a question to ask, please put it in the Q&A. So as you can see on your screen, we have an amazing group of people who are here to share the success stories that they've had over the last year and before doing interdisciplinary legal representation for parents. We decided that February was a time where we needed some uplifting, and the folks on your screen are here to inspire and to share their stories. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Teora Graves, who's a senior parent advocate at the Center for Family Representation, and she is going to walk us through this webinar. She's going to introduce our speakers, and they will be popping in and out of your screen as we go. We want you to be able to focus on the state that is presenting, but we wanted you to see all of our friends that are here to celebrate our success stories. So speakers, other than our friends from Massachusetts, if you could go off screen, and Teora, here is, I'm kicking it to you. Thank you for joining us again, and thanks for hosting. Teora.
Thank you, Mimi. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy to be here today because I think this is well overdue and much needed for the state of affairs we have all been in for over a year now. Today, we are going to hear some great stories about the resiliency of our parents and the things that we have heard and seen and have had the privilege to bear witness to. I am a senior parent advocate for the Center for Family Representation in Queens, New York. We also have an office in Manhattan. We have been indigent sole provider for, I'm sorry, not sole provider, but primary provider for legal representation for parents facing abuse and neglect cases in Manhattan since 2007 and in Queens since 2011. We have attorneys, we have social workers, we have family advocates, and we also have parent advocates who are parents who have been directly impacted by the system and who have successfully regained custody of their children. We have 5 parent advocates. I'm very proud to say that because I do believe that CFR understands and values the fact that parent advocates are the experts and uplifts the parent voice, because we do feel that parents should have voice and choice in regards to what happens with their children, no matter what situation they are in. Today, I'm going to highlight a parent, and I'll refer to her by Mrs. R, who at the beginning of all of this, I got a call from her on March 13th, 2020, telling me that the agency wanted to have a conference with her to talk about terminating her parental rights. They also had canceled her visit for that day and wanted to do a conference over the phone. By the time I got back in touch with her, because I'm pretty sure we're all over the country, March 13th is significant because that is the day that everything basically went virtual in New York City. So there was a lot of chaos. There was a lot of uncertainty. I'm a person that likes to have all the information that I can in order to advocate successfully for my clients. And it was one of the very first times in my 11-year career that I didn't have the answers for her. She was very overwhelmed, as you can imagine. And the agency was being very difficult. They did not want to reschedule the conference so that I would be able to join. They didn't really provide her with a lot of information. We later found out that the foster parent was heavily involved in the conference, which is a violation because the foster parent should not have been privy to a lot of the information. And this is also a foster parent who has been problematic through the life of the case in regards to making it known from the very beginning that her intention was to adopt the children. So as you can imagine, it was very frustrating for our client. The first thing I did was call our attorney. I wanted to see what could be done. At that time, there was a lot going on in court as well in regards to adjournments. People just trying to figure out what's going to happen. People thought that we would probably be out of court for maybe 2 weeks the most. No one was really sure what was going to happen. Mrs. R did not give up though. She called and texted and emailed and forwarded me every single email from the workers. And she eventually called me on three-way into the conference. And I entered the conference at the very part of when they were talking about the allegations. They were talking about why they were going to be filing for a termination of parental rights for her, with no concurrent goal to plan with her for return to parent at all. And Mrs. R did have diagnoses. She was seeking treatment at the time, but she had about 6 or 7 therapists, and it was not something that she wanted to continuously re-traumatize herself and retelling her story over and over again. She was very protective of her information, so she was not being forthcoming with the agency because she also had a high overturn with the workers at the agency, and it appeared that each worker that came in did not read the notes. So she just was not trusting of anyone except for us. We did not succeed in that conference in regards to changing the agency's mind and terminating her rights. At the end of the call, I spent about an hour on the phone with her. I called in the attorney and we told her we're not going to give up. You know, she was saying that they basically was telling her that her visits were suspended indefinitely. And we said, we're not going to give up. We're going to fight for your visits. We don't know how we're going to do that yet because we're not sure of anything, but we wanted to reassure her that this wasn't something that was just sealed for her. Over the next 3 weeks, she re-engaged in her therapy. She re-engaged in her medication management. And what was really significant about that is that she really had no direction. A lot of service providers were going virtual, and we realized about halfway through that this was something that actually worked better for her. And she did not have the anxiety of taking the train anymore. She can do it from the comfort of her home. She had the time she did her own research on her therapist and her service providers. So she was in control. And with that, we started to advocate for the agency to produce the children for visits. And initially, this problematic foster parent said that if she had to bring the children in person to the visits, she would put in her 10-day notice to have the children removed from her home. The agency was not in favor of that because they thought that this was going to be the adoptive resource for the children. Our client said, fine, if that's what she wants to do, I am still demanding my visits. She was very vocal about that. We started emailing the workers and the attorneys on the case to make sure that that position was known, that she was fine if her children needed to move, and the agency guilted her and tried to make her feel as if she was being selfish. And in a very, I want to say a moment that I was so proud of her because she could have backed down. She could have said, you know what, you're right. You know, I I don't want this for my children. She said that if someone would be willing to give up my children because they want to see their mother and their mother wants to see them, then this is not the person that should adopt my children. And I was just so proud of her. And I knew it took a lot of strength. And, you know, her children she has one 11-year-old and she has a 7-year-old. So they're not small children. They were very aware of what was going on. They were also vocal of wanting to be with their mother and to see their mother. They wanted to make sure she wasn't sick with COVID. Every missed visit, they would think that something happened to her. So she started to do what she needed to do to make sure she communicated with them. And about 6 months in, we get a call from the worker saying that the foster mother has had a change of heart. She is no longer going to be a adoptive resource, and they would like to have another meeting to see what our client's plan was for her children. She was so ecstatic. And she immediately said, I just want them home. I don't want to have to go through all the hoops anymore. I just want them home. And one of the things that she did, she is one of those people that will do her research. She said, from my understanding, the agency does not have to do there's like a tier that a lot of agencies do here in New York. So they usually go to day supervised visit, to day supervised visits, to overnight visits, and then they do a trial discharge. And some combination in between those. She said, my understanding is they can just send my kids home if they think that I can parent my children safely. I have a letter from my therapist. I have a letter from my support group. She asked us if we can give her a letter. We said we didn't think a letter from us would do any good because we would be biased because we knew how great she was doing, but sure, we would stand by her. And she successfully got her children reunited with her. There was so much work put into that in the last couple of months. The children have been home now for 3 months without any incidents. The children have made up a lot of schoolwork because they were also in a lot of services and they just was not able to focus. There was a lot that came out of the negativity that they were dealing with, being with a foster parent who talked very negatively about their mother, and they knew their mother better than anyone. And they just stayed so positive. And she sent me a text on Saturday, because she is one of those clients, it doesn't matter what time it is, she will text me to let me know what's going on. She sent me a text on Saturday and just thanked us so much, because she said for the first time, her children were actually in foster care for almost 3 years. She said for the first time in 3 years, she was actually able to take her children out and play in the snow and just have a good time. And, she just really was able to reflect on the simple things in life that matters. So those are the things that we really want to hear today and highlight. And, another thing before I pass it over to Massachusetts that I want to just say is that our parents have become teachers. They have become doctors. They have been so resilient through this time. They have made sacrifices that are unfathomable to people who are not in those positions, like whether or not they're going to go to work or stay home with their children. And I think it's time for them to be highlighted and for their voices to be heard and uplifted. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Romina and Amy.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from snowy and cold and rainy Massachusetts. Hope everyone else around has some better weather. My name is Amy Pont. I'm a social worker with the Children and Family Law Division in Fall River, Massachusetts.
Hi, everybody. I'm Romina Silejian, and I am a trial attorney with the Children and Family Law Division, also in Fall River, Massachusetts.
So Romina and I are going to share a success story from our office that occurred during this difficult time during this pandemic. We use an interdisciplinary model in all of our offices throughout the state. The model really focuses on a team approach to cases where the assigned attorney and a social worker collaborate together with the client. We each bring our own expertise and skills to each case to ensure that our clients are receiving the most well-rounded and thoughtful representation possible. To achieve success, we use this team approach to empower our client to work with DCF that's what our child welfare system is called, and other community providers to achieve his or her goals. So before we share our success story, I want everyone to close their eyes. Just gonna have to trust everyone since you're not on video, and think back to March of last year when the pandemic really hit. Think about the struggles that you and your family faced, whether they be loss of employment, separation of family and friends, dealing with your children 24/7 with no breaks. Now imagine that you're one of our clients who has experienced the most devastating loss of all, the loss of his or her children, and that loss being exacerbated by lack of contact, bonding time. Imagine what it would feel like to not see your children for months. Imagine how you're expected to engage in services and survive without seeing your children. Imagine how you're expected to survive, period. I know that all of you today have imagined this scenario hundreds of times since March. I know that Romina and I have, and it has really driven us and inspired us to work even harder for our clients. So I want everyone to keep that in mind today as you're hearing all these stories. So on a good note, I'm going to share a success story that involves a mom that Romina represents and how her positive outcome was really achieved by using this interdisciplinary team. Our client's 5-month-old daughter was removed from her care in March, 2 days before the pandemic halted in-person parenting time. The day that her daughter was removed, she was able to see her that afternoon, and then no more in-person time. Concerns that led to the removal revolved around domestic violence and an accidental injury to the child. From March until the end of June, our client was only permitted to have virtual parenting time with her daughter. I don't know how effective virtual parenting time is with a 5-month-old, but our client really made the most of it and would read her bedtime stories and just talk with her and really tried to make that time meaningful for her daughter. Our client consistently engaged in therapy, a parenting class, domestic violence education class, and began working with a domestic violence advocate. I think it's also important to note that our client's only 22 years old. She's, a young woman who had her first child and was still, growing up herself. During that time, there were no further concerns of domestic violence. Our client began having increased parenting time with her daughter at the end of June, and that time steadily increased. And DCF was planning to reunify in December. In September, our client learned that her housing support was going to be terminated if she was not granted custody of her daughter by the end of November. Not just placement, but custody. In Massachusetts, it's pretty typical for parents to be awarded placement first and then custody a few months later. It's not typical to have them, at the same time. So Romina and I were able to utilize an interdisciplinary team approach that greatly benefited our client and her daughter. Our first step, we consulted with our client and just made sure that she was on board with our approach. She had already begun to lay the groundwork for this by building positive relationships with her social worker, the foster mother, her therapist, and her domestic violence advocate. And she was more than willing to work with all team members to bring her daughter home. We then identified with our client, everything we did was with our client, obviously. All of the interdisciplinary team members and supports that could really assist her in achieving our goal. So we identified our client, foster mother, the therapist, domestic violence advocate, housing staff, the social worker and supervisor, DCF attorney, child's attorney, and family members. So we had a pretty big team. And the next step was to identify and implement actions, both clinical and legal, to take to achieve reunification for our client. And this is really where that interdisciplinary model shines, is when you have legal and clinical actions all at the same time that really work and that did work to help our client achieve her goal. So Romina is going to take over and talk about some of the legal actions, And then I'm going to highlight some of the clinical actions.
Stated previously, our client's daughter was removed in March. I requested a reunification plan on 5 separate occasions in writing to DCF, legal and clinical, but no action was taken. I requested another reunification plan in early September, right before our client learned that her housing support would be terminated. After our client learned of the termination of benefits, I took several legal steps in September. I submitted a letter to home base advocating for our client to retain her benefits. I requested a rapid reunification plan in writing to DCF clinical and legal, and then I filed an emergency motion for a reunification plan. The judge granted an evidentiary hearing, and it was scheduled for the beginning of October. I then filed an appeal for the termination of our client's home-based benefits. In the beginning of October, the motion hearing began and was continued to the beginning of November, as all the parties agreed to meet to discuss the case. At the beginning of November, the motion hearing reconvened and conditional custody was offered to our client. So those were some of the specific legal actions that we have taken, but many more other actions were taken during this almost 2-month time period by both Amy and I. Amy will share some of those actions.
I'm going to briefly share kind of what clinical actions were taken. Like Romina had said, we participated in, advocated for several meetings with our client, DCF, and the attorneys on parenting time, engagement in services, assessment of safety and risk. We also, everyone all met with housing to discuss how we could maintain our clients' housing. Since DCF was able to understand that a little more clearly, we were able to develop a plan where our client could keep her housing. Our client developed a comprehensive safety plan with their domestic violence advocate. It was approved by DCF. Daycare was referred for. Our client began spending more time with her daughter in the community and finally at home. So really, the combination of our legal and clinical action steps and our collaboration with the interdisciplinary team ensured a successful outcome for our client. Many of the team members, especially our client, reported positive feedback about the process. And we're hoping that this positive feedback will lead these particular social workers, supervisors, attorneys to engage in this process with us again. Our client developed a better rapport with the social worker, and she felt that she was a valued team member instead of a mother who lost her child. Our client already had so many strengths, including perseverance, mindfulness, determination, resilience. And this model allowed everyone on the team to really see these strengths clearly. Trust was built, our client's self-esteem improved. In our office, our goal is to use this approach on all of our cases to achieve similar outcomes for our clients. And now more than ever, it's crucial that our clients be represented by these interdisciplinary teams to achieve long-lasting success. So that's what's happening in Massachusetts. So I hope everybody was inspired by that. I know we were, and can hopefully use some of these techniques in your own cases.
Thank you, Romina and Amy. I'm just checking the Q&A section right now to see if there's any questions. There are a lot of positive comments in the chat as well. I don't see any direct questions to you two guys. And congratulations to your client, because that is a beautiful, beautiful way to kind of tie that up as well. At this time, I'm going to pass it over to Tanya and Jameson.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jamison Tessner, and I'm a contract public defender with the Washington State Office of Public Defense, and I am based in Mason County, Washington. And Mason County is a rural county in Washington State. I have an active caseload of between 75 and 80 dependency and termination of parental rights cases. And prior to that, I was a criminal public defender with the Minnesota Board of Public Defense. And at the same time, I was also a court-appointed attorney for parents involved in the child welfare system in Minnesota. And I will just say there are many, many things to love about Minnesota. However, comprehensive parent representation in the child welfare system is not one of them. So it was a relatively large adjustment for me moving out to Washington State. And one of the biggest changes to my practice in transitioning to the great state of Washington was the addition of public defense social workers. And so now I have the esteemed pleasure of working with Miss Tanya McClanahan.
Thank you, Jamison. Tanya McClanahan here. I'm a contracted social service worker with the Washington State Office of Public Defense.
So Tanya and I chose one of our cases that involved a mother, and there were two sort of primary issues that the Department of Children, Youth, and Families had identified as safety issues when the children were removed from our client's care. The first was child neglect due to methamphetamine addiction, and the second was mental health instability due to methamphetamine use. And I know for the defense teams out there, everyone has experience working with challenging clients, and this really is one of those stories. And the story begins on a busy Thursday dependency docket. Typically, we have back-to-back court appearances beginning at about 8:30 in the morning, and the day usually lasts until 4 or 5 p.m. This was one of those days, and the security officer in the courtroom approached me and pointed out that there was a very angry mother in the corridor and that she wanted to talk to me. And I kind of glanced over his shoulder and I didn't recognize her, and I really had no idea why she would be so upset with me. And without having been provided the state's petition at that point and having really no time to break from my dependency docket, I attempted to briefly explain the child welfare process the best that I could with the amount of time that I had. And I think it's needless to say that the client was not satisfied at that point. We did show up to the shelter care hearing the next day, and the client was extremely resistant to the process and really very skeptical of me. And I think that these are very valid emotions at this point in the case. But with relatively egregious facts, we agreed to shelter care, and we eventually agreed to dependency. And at that point, the client was not getting what she wanted, and this just increased her skepticism of the system and of me. And at a later point in the case, this is the point where she considered terminating my representation, but I'll get to that later. After the court made a finding of dependency, this mother joined our family therapeutic court program available in our jurisdiction. It's called Family Reunification Court. And the client had a lot of questions and needed regular encouragement and reassurance. And it was really more than I had time to offer her. And so I really needed help. And it was at that point that I asked Tanya to join our case.
And so when I met this mom, I do an intro with parents and I explain my role. I fall under attorney-client privilege. I ask permission to be their voice until they can find their own. I also let them know I only work for them and answer to them and their attorney. That I may work with many, however, I only answer to them and their attorney. I also explain to them if there's ever any questions or confusions or something does not sound right, I ask that they please call me first. Ever any slip-ups, call me and we'll get through it together and process what to do next. I inform them that if they ever need anyone's contact information, I will get that for them too. Even if they lose it, please ask again. I'd rather give it to them 5 times and then them not have it once. Then we will, and I also ask that if no one gets back to them like in a timely manner, please let me know that too. Then we will remind those professionals whose case is more important and whose case that you want on top of their stack. And I also let the parents know to not wait for someone to come knock on their door and check on them regularly. That most likely will not be happening. I try to encourage them to be proactive and check in with their team weekly, and I can help get them started with that. I iterate, if they ever have any needs, please ask and I will find answers and resources. If anyone ever tells them no or is rude or disrespectful, I dare them to call me. I want to empower the parent, smooth out the edges so they can move forward. It's all about moving forward. This is so important for parents. I even started a support group and named it Parent Forward. If they tell me they cannot stand their department social worker, I validate their feelings and emotions and tell them that's okay. You don't have to like anyone. Now let's find a way to work together and move forward. I also make sure they and others know when a parent feels stripped and gutted alive, they are allowed to have extreme emotions. Their heart has been ripped out of their chest. It's the ones that don't show emotion I worry more about. I sit with the parent and I ask them what their plan is, what they want their case to look like. Then I give us both things to work on to show it's a team effort. Then I tell them, okay, this is our plan. I will work for their plan. And they can call me next week and say, Tanya, I've changed my mind. Then we can work for a different plan. I remind them this is their case and they still have rights. And let's work towards their end goal. I meet them where they're at and work from there, wherever that is. I also make sure they know they now never have to sit at any meeting or hearing alone again in this case. I absolutely love what I do. I assist parents with day-to-day, case-by-case stuff, and I can help best support my attorneys for court. I go to work every day to help one more parent move forward.
Thank you. And I think it's important to note that when Tanya is assigned to a case, the court is typically relieved and encouraged. Tanya's skills, her empathy, her lived experience, and her ability to connect and build rapport with parents lends credibility to the case in the eyes of our judicial officers. So I regularly inform the court when Tanya is assigned to one of my cases. As the story goes, the client began to engage in outpatient treatment, but she was still skeptical about whether she needed treatment or needed to even be in the child welfare system. And so Tanya and I continued to reassure her, and Tanya really increased her regular contact with this mother. Despite that, the client continued to be very resistant to the process. And shortly thereafter, we learned of a relapse. And based on that relapse, the mother was recommended to attend outpatient treatment, inpatient treatment, which really just angered her even more. And she needed a lot of support and encouragement, more than I could provide, and in all truth, more than I know how to appropriately provide. And that's really where Tanya went above and beyond in this case. The client needed to go to inpatient. She was resistant, and Tanya said that she could transport her.
Yes, and so I made contact with mom, and she asked me to meet her at a very rural location, of which I did not exactly know which house it was. So I sat alongside the road in the general area. I sat there for some time waiting and waiting, texting and texting, and she finally showed. We were at her ex's house and junkyard owned by his dad, so she could hide her vehicle from her recent ex. So I got to meet first baby's daddy. We get her loaded into my vehicle with her bags ready for inpatient. Then she needed to go to see her recent ex and father of baby number 2, just one more time before leaving for inpatient so she could truly work on letting go of that relationship. So I was able to meet with him and his mother at their location. And then after that, we stopped by the convenience store and I asked her to pick out some snacks and drinks for the road and any last caffeine she wanted. Then we headed to inpatient, and this was a ride I started to really get to know her and some of her underlying history. Also, that she had mommy and daddy issues, as she said, that she did not understand. By the time we got to inpatient, she wanted to adopt me.
I really love that story, and that's one of the reasons why we chose this case. So the client came back from inpatient and she had sort of a renewed determination in the case. She continued to engage in her court-ordered services, and she continued to engage in our therapeutic court program. And I think that this was the point in the case where the client really recognized that it was okay to have struggles in life and it was okay to ask for help. And I really think that that turning point was due in large part to the conversations that she was able to have with Tanya. And so the client was able to obtain her own housing. In fact, she asked me at one point if I would contact her prospective landlord and sort of vouch for her. And I proudly did that. And shortly thereafter, she was accepted into the apartment complex where she currently is residing. And she really became a strong advocate for herself. And her and I decided that we would file a motion to return her daughters to her care. And Tanya was able to assist and be present in the negotiations around a safety plan for the return home. And ultimately, it was a agreed return home with the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And it was an agreed return home because the department social worker was also invested in the case. And although we butted heads on many issues in the case and continue to butt heads on many cases today, we were able to work together, including Tanya, to craft an agreed return home that satisfied all parties. And so with a new apartment and the children returning home, the client had a lot of needs that Tanya was really able to assist with.
I was able to meet her in her home and do a walkthrough. I was able to get her a big flat screen TV, some house plants. I want to find the basic needs that the parents feel are important to them. Then I connect the parent with the resource. This is their case, their story, not mine. I also kept weekly check-ins to help her hold herself accountable and affirm new habits and a lifestyle.
And so eventually, the client completed all of her treatment programs. And if you remember earlier when I stated that the mother was prepared to terminate my representation, this is the point in the case where she told me that. And she told me that in the context of another parent at the beginning of his case who happened to be sitting next to her in court. And that parent had offhandedly mentioned some frustration with my representation and considered also terminating my representation. And this mother's response was, "Don't do that." And then she proceeded to tell him her story. And so the work that Tanya and I did on this one case ended up having ripple effects on other cases in our jurisdiction. So eventually I assisted the client in obtaining parenting plans for both of her children that gave her primary custody. She graduated from family reunification court and the case was dismissed on the same day, just in time for our reunification day celebration in Mason County. And it's one of those stories where the client came into the system addicted to drugs, unstable mental health. Her children were removed from her care, and she left the system sober with her kids in her care, parenting plans for both children, housing, employment, and a lasting network of support with her public defense social worker, her attorney, and even her DCYF social worker. And so in thinking about this presentation and thinking about my sort of takeaways when working with public defense social workers, I think there's really two primary takeaways. Defense social workers, especially ones with lived experience in the child welfare system, have a unique ability to build rapport with clients through a common perspective. This is just something that my privilege in education will never allow me to bring to a case. And the second is that defense social workers lend credibility to the case in the eyes of the court and in the eyes of the child welfare agency. And I think that helps our clients immensely. Over the course of doing this work and having defense social workers available, I cannot imagine doing this work without the expertise of a defense social worker for many of my cases. This morning, I did just a quick review, and Tanya and I have successfully reunited 13 parents with their children. And I'm just one of many attorneys that Tanya works with. And so I think there's a lot of success when we combine social workers and attorneys in a defense team.
That is awesome. Thank you so much, Tanya and Jameson. I'm going to go over, there's a lot of positive comments in the chat again. I am going to go to Amber right now. Again, thank you so much, Jameson and Tanya.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're calling from. I'm a staff attorney with the East Bay Family Defenders. We are located in San Leandro, California. And at the East Bay Family Defenders, we have an interdisciplinary model where teams are made up of attorneys, social workers, parent advocates, and case investigators, all of whom collaborate to provide holistic legal and social service advocacy. Prior to becoming a staff attorney with the East Bay Family Defenders, I supported parents as a case investigator by providing support that attorneys who, they're in court all day and would want to provide this support to parents, but simply don't have the capacity to. And that's really where my role as the case investigator came in. And I had roles as interviewing witnesses, bridging communication between clients and the social service agency social workers, or even calling service providers. And similar to Amy, I think it's important to take everybody back to March of 2020, specifically around March 15th of 2020. And if you recall, shelter-in-place orders were coming down all over the country and in Alameda County, which is the community that the East Bay Family Defenders serves. And if you remember, many folks at this time, they had their hours cut at work, money wasn't really coming in, getting food or cleaning supplies from basically any grocery store was a real challenge. And this story that I would like to share with you all takes place during this really terrifying time. Our client, who is the mother, had her children removed from her due mainly to allegations related to food insecurities and the social service agency's concern about the cleanliness of her home and lack of running water. And I'd like to highlight that the agency removed these children from the mother, who didn't know where they were, if they were safe, during a time when California was essentially on lockdown, and we didn't really know much about COVID. And it was clear at the initial detention hearing that all of the agency's concerns could have been addressed if the parents were just given a little extra support. But we were faced with a few challenges. We were working on a tight timeline to get these kids returned to the parents, and the parents primarily spoke Spanish. Many of the food banks, let alone the grocery stores, were really overrun and didn't have much supply. And getting cleaning supplies was nearly impossible for anyone at this time. So this family was expected, to have a full stock, cabinets, fridge, all of that, and also clean their home during a time when you couldn't get any cleaning supplies. So the attorney asked for my help, and the mother and I strategized and created an action plan. The mother and father would work on getting running water and cleaning the home, and I would create kind of like a list of food banks, the times that the mother would need to be there, what she needed to bring in order to get food from the food bank, whether it's an ID, proof of what city she lived in, et cetera, and what their COVID policies were. Each food bank was exercising different levels of security with regarding COVID. And in creating this, master list, if you will, about where the food banks were and what time she needed to be there, her and I were talking, and she informed me that she didn't have a functioning fridge, so it would be really hard for her to store a larger capacity of food that wasn't just a day-to-day like she had been doing. So that presented a little bit of a wrinkle for us. And I realized that, we live really close to Cal, which is the Berkeley undergrad campus. And I don't know if you guys live close to any undergrad campuses, but if you do, you probably know that there's just like a cycle of free furniture, free kitchen supplies on corners. So I thought about it, and I asked for the client's permission, and her and I decided that it would be a good idea to create a Facebook post in the undergrad campus's Facebook community, and just put it out there that I worked for a nonprofit and I had a client that was in need of a fridge, and if anyone was willing to donate. And sure enough, somebody replied to me, and we communicated with each other. We created a plan to do a socially distanced pickup, and I picked up the fridge, and then I brought it over to the attorney and put it in the attorney's car, and the attorney eventually delivered that fridge to the client. And then the client really took it from there and drove all over Alameda County to different food banks and was able to get a good amount of food. The parents were able to, get running water, and somehow they found cleaning supplies and were able to get the home in a really clean condition. And because of all of these efforts, the children were returned. And I really believe that this was an interdisciplinary team effort. While I was working on the ground and getting like these little details worked out, the attorney, who was also amazing, was working on the legal aspect of the case, and even more because she's the one that actually delivered the mini fridge to our client. And really, our client did everything in her power that she could to fight for the return of her children. And it was clear if they just had a little bit extra support, it wouldn't have been an issue in the beginning. And that story just really resonates with how having just support and the ability to think creatively about how to problem solve really makes a difference in a case. And that's all I have for my story.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you so much. I know Bree had a question for you, so I'm going to open it up for Bree right now. So you have some time before the next presenter. Bree, can you hear us?
I think I can elaborate maybe on what Bree was going to ask me if we still have some time.
Yes, we do.
Okay. I think in my role as a case investigator, I personally have a personal experience with the social service agency, in that I was informally removed from my parents and was raised by my aunt and uncle. And I think that that really informs the way that I approach this interdisciplinary model, in that you know, really understanding that you have to meet parents where they are, and the impact and the lasting effects that this has on the family. Because, you know, when they are a part of this system, that is a moment within this family's life, and it's going to impact them for years to come. It's not just in this moment. So really meeting parents where they are and helping them to build a strong foundation for the future, and coming with them with empathy and understanding, and really lifting them up so, you know, they can fight this and become a better family in the long run.
And Amber, we do have a couple more minutes. So I would like to know if you have any suggestions for any of the attendees today, if they have encountered caseworkers, social workers who are just difficult to work with, and how they navigate that.
And Amber, one other question that I know Bree was interested in is having you talk about your transition from one role to another role after graduating. So if you could talk about that as well, I think we'd all appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, so first I'll respond to maybe some difficulty in communication between like us and the social service agency social workers. I think when there is a complicated relationship and there's conflict between us, I always just, you know, try and make sure that the client's voice is heard, and being pretty vigilant about that, and making sure that the client is able to be heard from this social worker. And if the social worker doesn't necessarily respond well, it can be challenging, but I think that having me as like a medium to be able to kind of support that parent in that way creates a better communication, even between the client and that social worker, because the parent knows that I'm behind them and I'm also helping to communicate. With regard to changing positions, I was a case investigator for about a year, and then I passed the bar exam and was offered a staff attorney position, and here I am. And I think that transition has been interesting and has presented its own challenges, just in that, you know, as an attorney, I may not have the time to give as much attention to a client as I would really want, like I was able to do as a case investigator. And that's really hard for me, just because I know what this parent deserves, and I want to give that parent everything that I can. So that's still something I'm trying to navigate, as having, wearing a different hat. But ultimately, approaching defense kind of like with a Swiss Army knife, right? As a case investigator, I had a tool, and now I'm incorporating that tool within me as a staff attorney.
I'm loving all the stories and just hearing about all the zealous advocacy, and definitely firsthand experience is something that connects us to the work in a different way that a lot of people don't understand, but our clients appreciate it so much. Thank you so much, Amber. I appreciate everything. I'm gonna go over now to Lucia.
It would help if I changed the mute button to on. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real honor to be here with colleagues from all over the country. I'm here in South Central Colorado in a very tiny little town. And as some of you may know, our model for multidisciplinary teams in Colorado is such that in some of the urban areas, we do have firms with dedicated social workers, family advocates, and thankfully parent partners as of last year. But in the rural areas, we have a unique setup because we're all independent consultants. And I will say that there is a certain profile to sort of rugged Western independence. And a lot of the attorneys in the rural areas are just used to working all by themselves. So I've been working for the past couple of years for ORPC, Office of Respondent Parent Counsel, and working hard to encourage more attorneys to embrace the multidisciplinary team, because we know from statistics that we have better outcomes for parents and families with these teams, because parents, obviously parent partners, social workers, family advocates, we think differently and we have different skills than attorneys do. And I think the combination is what makes it magic and helps us have so many more successes. So the case that I want to share is truly one of my favorites. I get called a lot of times on the bilingual cases, the Spanish-speaking parents. And so I travel a lot all over Southern Colorado because not a lot of the family advocates or social workers are bilingual. This was a drug case in a small Southern Colorado city called Pueblo. And the sheriff they'd done some investigation and figured out that mom was selling meth and possibly selling arms. There were a lot of arms recovered in the case. And they'd also learned through the investigation that the father of these two boys, ages 4 and 6 at the time, his visa had expired, so he was illegal. So cut to March of 2018, and they raid the house and they arrest mom, and ICE is there, and they take dad into custody, of course, detain him with ICE. And as I said, March of 2018, I was contacted by the attorney February of 2019. So our father had spent 11 months thus far in ICE. Mother had been sent to prison. The children had been passed through 3 foster homes. And at the same time, in February of 2019, that the attorney and I planned a visit to the ICE detention center in Denver. The department happened to place the children in a foster adopt home, and they filed the termination of parental rights. During this whole time, the department, the guardian ad litem, had made literally no attempt to contact the father at the ICE detention center, and even his own respondent parent counsel had a difficult time getting a hold of him. They processed the case through default, saying father had been uncooperative. So the attorney and I, along with a Spanish-speaking psychologist, go to the ICE center in Denver, February 22nd, ironically. So it was 2 years ago today. And we find this very dear father who is absolutely out of his mind, worried that he will be deported, that he doesn't understand what's going on. He had no idea that his wife was selling drugs. He didn't know that he assumed that she'd gone to prison. So wisely, the attorney, and we really did have such a great partnership on this case, as I think I do with so many attorneys, the attorney wisely had brought the psychologist. We ended up having a psychological evaluation ready to present to the court. We had to go so far as to motion the court to allow the children to come and visit their father at the immigration center. Meantime, I'm contacting kin in Mexico and working closely with the Mexican consulate, who's turned out to be an amazing partner for us here. I've worked with them now on a number of cases. They've done home studies for us in Mexico or arranged them. Some of them of better quality than we even get through ICPC. And the father is hoping to get enough money to pay an immigration attorney that he doesn't get deported. And March 2019, the court approves the motion to have the children visit. And this was one of the greatest risks we took in this case, because we didn't really know after so much time whether or not, so imagine that the children hadn't seen their father, and now they were 5 and 7 for a year. And so we go through the metal detectors, and the attorney is behind me, the children are in front of me, and the attorney's got a telephone. He's trying to record this. And the children saw their father across the room and ran towards him. And we even had the immigration guards in tears. It was very, very meaningful. And so there really wasn't a question as to whether the children were bonded with their father or not. He was released in May of 2019. He went immediately back to Pueblo. He had a job. He got his green card in July. He aced his treatment plan. There were no drug issues. They conducted a parent-child interactional because they wanted to go down that path of no attachment. We had a guardian ad litem who, in open court, remarkably said to everyone present, really, these children would be so much better off with the foster adopt family because they have so many books and toys. And in fact, the boys are enlightened now because they're playing softball. After that hearing was when the attorney took me aside, and remember, very conservative town and constituents. And the attorney said to me, Lucia, I hate to say it, but I think these people are racist. So we pushed and we fought in the court. And during this time, my role as a family advocate was constant communicator, like all the rest of the presenters today, shoulder to cry on, transportation, talking the father off the ledge when he thought he wasn't going to get the children back. It was a remarkable, pretty much 6 months. And in the fall, right around Thanksgiving, this was also despite the guardian ad litem going to my client's home, which actually was kind of a converted shack behind another home, but it had running water and it had a bathroom, and he really couldn't get anything more than that. And the attorney wisely said, let's push to get the kids returned back there, despite the fancy, well-resourced foster home. And the foster parents also intervened. They very much wanted these little boys. But as I say, our client aced the treatment plan. He had supervised visits for months. Even though there really were no safety concerns, they wouldn't let him see his children alone. And another famous quote was from the visitation coordinator. He said, I couldn't believe it. That father played soccer with his boys for 4 hours, as if that's something so rare. But we were incredibly gratified in December, right before Christmas of 2019, that custody was returned to our client. And he's still happy today. I'm still in touch with him, with his little boys. And I tell this story because were it a year later, none of this would have happened, obviously. So it's happy to remember that. And I think in closing, I'd just like to say that as all the other presenters have expressed, holistic approach, the really works to reunify, because we all have different skills. And I think especially in Colorado, now that we have the addition of parent partners on our team, it's just remarkable what these teams are able to do. And we're getting more and more advocates and social workers and parent partners on board. In rural areas, we really have to think extra hard and think outside the box and change people's patterns of working by themselves in isolation and thinking, well, we're in a rural area, so we can't do that because we don't live on the Front Range, Denver, Boulder, Colorado Springs. I would also say that a lesson learned in this case that's very important and close to my heart is that kin is kin. And in this case, were our client to have been deported, there was an absolutely viable aunt in Mexico. We produced a home study. She was absolutely able, willing, ready to parent these children for her brother. And we had a caseworker from the department in this case who said to us, if I have to go to Mexico to look at that home, I'll quit. Kin is kin. And frankly, Mexico is closer to Colorado than New York is. But, and lastly, I would say, I think as family advocates and social workers, although certainly I'm careful going to different communities and communities that I'm not familiar with everyone, we need to call out biases. We need to hold people accountable for trying to superimpose these values upon families for whom these are not their values. On Saturday, because I pretty much don't turn off my phone for my clients, on Saturday, one of my clients said, bless you. And I thought, wait, bless you for trusting me and allowing me to help you in your very, very darkest time. And so I would say there's so much grace in this work, and it's an honor to be part of it.
Thank you, Lucia. That was so inspiring. I did hear you say that you were the point of contact for the father when he was having a difficult time. Do you mind sharing some inspirational things you might have said to him, just to give us a peek in to what that was like?
I spent many Saturday evenings and Sundays, because he works as a roofer. So he would fall apart. He would let himself feel all these emotions when he finally got off the roofs. And he would call me and say, is it worth it? You know, are they going to take those kids? You know, how can these people be telling me that I'm not a good enough father? I haven't done anything wrong. So I really would I don't think there's anything specific that I said, Teora, but I try really hard to be a good listener. And I just spend a lot of time talking him off the ledge. And it was very poignant because there was, as I've mentioned, there was such a socioeconomic disparity in this case with this foster family and my friend, our client in the shack. And it's not really a shack, it's like a studio, you know, but he was very, very proud of the fact that he didn't think money was important to raise these kids well. And I will tell you, so these boys, one of them just turned 9 a couple weeks ago, and his other son will be 7 this month. And they are healthy and happy, and they still live in their one room.
Awesome.
Abode.
Awesome. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Tiara.
No problem. We're going to go over to Sarah and Antoinette now. Sarah. I'm sorry.
Sarah, we can't hear you. Antoinette, can you say something and hopefully we can hear you, and Sarah, we can figure out what's wrong with yours.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect.
So Sarah, maybe if you try to turn off your camera, sometimes that helps the sound. Or you may have to go out and come back in. But Antoinette, can you start us off?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Antoinette. I am the social worker at the Corridor Program at Dependency Advocacy Center in Santa Clara County, here in Northern California. The Corridor Program is a program that is designed to assist parents who are on formal probation and who are also navigating the child welfare system and the criminal justice system simultaneously. My role in Corridor is to collaborate with our client, with Sarah, who is the managing attorney of Corridor, and also with the Department of Child Welfare here in San Jose. And also in the program, we have 2 gender-specific mentor parents who work with us, who have lived experience, both with the criminal justice system and with the child welfare system.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, excellent. Well, I can just jump in. Thank you, Antoinette. This is one of the amazing things about having an interdisciplinary team, that we can, all work with each other and pick up the slack when something is not working perfectly. So thank you so much. I think, Antoinette, you were just kind of discussing our model, which is that Antoinette is our dedicated social worker. And we also collaborate with 2 gender-specific mentor parents who have lived experience in both the child welfare system and the criminal justice system, which all of our clients as parents on formal probation are simultaneously navigating. So Antoinette typically uses her social work training and background to support our clients through advocacy outside of the courtroom. So mostly in directly communicating with the department social workers, in meetings, and in coaching our clients on how to effectively communicate and advocate for themselves, and also in designing safety plans for our clients. But we also have the ability to tap into Antoinette's expertise in a forensic capacity by using her as an expert. And in this particular case, I asked Antoinette to conduct an independent assessment regarding whether she would recommend releasing the minor to the care of my client, the mother, in a residential substance abuse treatment program, and to prepare a report for the court, which is the common practice in our jurisdiction, and be able to testify should she reach a conclusion that was different from the one being offered by the department social worker, who at the time was recommending that the child be removed from my client and family reunification services, which would have met continued separation between my client and her child for at least 6 months.
So like I was saying earlier, I am the social worker with Corridor, and I've been with Corridor for almost 3 years now. My social work background is mostly in child welfare. I previously worked for a child welfare department in another state as a child abuse investigator. So a lot of my experience is with child safety and risk assessments. So with this case, the approach that I wanted to take was to really get a full picture of our client, the mother's background, and how she got to this point, as well as any, or what kind of insight and changes had come since she had entered treatment. While the mother has had a long history of substance use, this was her first baby, and it was her first dependency case. She had taken the initiative and immediately entered a residential substance use program on her own, without the child right after the case came in. And also she had actually been asking to be reunited with her child at a substance use residential treatment program where she could be with her child since the beginning. As part of my assessment, I wanted to talk to different service providers, family members, friends, anybody who could provide some insight into the mother's relationship with her child prior to removal, her history with substance use, her childhood, mental health, treatment progress. And I interviewed and got a lot of information from her substance use counselor, family members, and close friends, as well as the mother herself, and used that information to develop the biopsychosocial portion of my report. I also did a literature review as part of my assessment with the assistance of my social work intern. We compiled several articles that really spoke to the efficacy of integrated substance use residential treatment in child welfare. Integrated meaning substance use treatment with a parenting component where residents can live with their child in the facility. We found that not only does this type of treatment lead to better child welfare outcomes in the long run, it's also better for the child as far as their child development and bonding with their parents. And it's better for the parent in terms of decreasing their substance use in the long term, decreasing parental stress, making it easier for them to focus on their treatment, increasing parenting skills, and decreasing the risk of future child welfare involvement. So the literature review really helped to show that having the mother complete an integrated program would have outcomes that were better overall and more timely than having the mother complete treatment separately before being reunified with her child, which is what the department social worker was recommending. I also knew from my experience with this particular residential program that we were trying to get the mother into, that it would be a safe place. They have mandated reporters, random drug testing, child development assistants, substance use counselors, and residents have the ability to access other service providers such as mental health therapists. I made sure to highlight that reunification would be in the best interest of the child, who was just under 2 years old at the time, because he had suffered trauma from being separated from his parent at a critical age where bonding and attachment are extremely important. And reunification in a safe environment would be the best way to mitigate that trauma. And also due to COVID, there had been no in-person visitation between the mother and her child for over 2 months, which further compounded the trauma of the child. At the end, it was my clinical assessment that there was no safety reason that the mother and child should not be reunified at the facility with court oversight through family maintenance services.
So I was able to file Antoinette's report and distribute it to all counsel and to the court about a week before our contested hearing date. And it enabled me to negotiate a settlement on the eve of trial. And I use the term settlement, but really more accurately, the assessment and report helped me win my case before I even walked into the courtroom. Because settlement implies that we made some concessions, and in this case, we didn't. We got the department to change their disposition recommendations outright. And our client had her baby back in her care at the residential treatment program by the end of the week. And I think that this really highlights the power of interdisciplinary representation. As an attorney, I had a report which was actually far superior in breadth and quality to the department's that I could use as a direct rebuttal to their arguments and to their recommendation. And at the end of the day, Antoinette's independent assessment and her expert recommendations made it undeniable that there was a reasonable means to protect the child without the need for removal. As a parent's attorney, sometimes you can only go so far, challenging the assessments of the department social worker with cross-examination alone. So having your own social worker who can testify and really undercut the department's assessment levels the playing field, and it's truly a game changer. And this was an opportunity for us to educate the court as well. Even though Antoinette never actually testified in court, the judge received and read her report, including that literature assessment. And this was very critical because we have been seeing a trend in our jurisdiction to move away from recommending this treatment program where mothers can be with their children. So this gave us an opportunity to remind not just the department, but also the court why these integrated programs are so important.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Antoinette. That is so helpful. And we do know that other jurisdictions do not have their advocates and social workers testify. And Antoinette's her study is being asked to be shared in the chat. So just keep those positive comments coming. We're going to go over to Alex and April now.
Hey guys, can you hear me? Just checking, I had to make sure. So hi, I'm April. I'm a parent advocate of Community Legal Services in Philadelphia in the Family Advocacy Unit. So my role is unique within our unit. I am a person with lived experience and I help parents pretty much navigate the child welfare system. And we know that that navigation is complex, to say the least. So I'm everything from a listening ear to a ride sometimes, a connection sometimes, and whatever our parents need. I believe in walking with every last one of my clients from start to finish. So the case we're going to be talking about today with Mrs. R. So, and I said Mrs. R, Mrs. G. In the beginning of this pandemic, I had a case that came across my desk. Now we were tasked to call out to all our clients, all different clients, and I was catching up on this case. So when it came to my desk, it was already in the process of a goal change. So the child suffered from a second-degree burn that happened in the home that the agency deemed abuse. But while I'm reading throughout the case and to catch up in order to prepare myself to call the parent just to say, hey, these are trying times right now. How are you? I'm not technically on the case as of yet. But reading through, I've seen a lot of things that was missed. More so, I felt as though the mom didn't have a fair shot. Now, I'm telling y'all, I come from my personal experience a lot of times. So I'm very passionate when it comes down to, justice issues and our parents in general. By me going through this system as well, and it took me a long time to get my children back. I wish I had our holistic model and the team that we are represented me back in the day when I had to go through it. So going through this case, it was frustrating to say the least, as far as what the mom was going through. No one, I believe wholeheartedly, no one should face termination of their parental rights if the child is not in immediate danger or in danger, or if it is an actual child abuse case. So before I called mom, I called the co-worker, which is our city's case managers, to ask, hey, what is the barriers to reunification? So asking a co-worker this, she said things like, mom can't stay clean, and I think mom is a chronic relapser or something like that. So me, myself, I'm in recovery. So when I heard that, I'm like, hold on, wait, pause. Did I miss something while going through mom's case? What is mom's drug of choice? And she said, marijuana. I'm like, hold on, what? So this case is being pretty much held back due to the fact that mom might possibly be smoking marijuana, which was an outrage for me. So I goes to mom's house. I know at the beginning of the pandemic, we were social distance. She had her mask on, I had mine on. And I'm like, give me every paperwork, anything that got signed, anything you've done so far. So it turns out mom had just completed parenting classes. Like a lot of the objectives that was on her case plan, she had met already, but it was still in the process of a termination. So that's when Alex stepped in.
So I'm Alex Dutton. I'm a staff attorney at Community Legal Services in our Family Advocacy Unit. And all I do is represent parents in abuse and neglect cases in Philadelphia. And so when I got involved, April had already done quite a bit of investigation on this case. And what I really think one of the big points we want to share with you is kind of the difference between having just an attorney with a huge caseload on the case versus having a holistic team on the case to kind of turn this case around. So when April first got involved and asked me if I wanted to be involved in representing this mom, our client, the agency had already filed petitions to terminate her parental rights. So the posture of this case from a legal standpoint was that we were fighting to protect her parental rights. And the story in this case, and April gave some details about it, general details about it, but the story was that our client was not only neglectful, but abusive due to a household accident that caused her daughter to have a second-degree burn. And that has been the narrative of this case, right? From the very beginning. Like, this accident has been blown up to be some sort of horrific act of parenting that had this parent not been poor, had this parent not been Black, would never have been considered even a transgression, let alone one that would put her on the child abuse registry for the rest of her life and keep her from her daughter that she had raised for the first 5 years of her life without issue. So what I think I want to highlight about this case is from the moment we got involved, April was bringing her expertise as a peer parent advocate to the table long before I got involved. But she does so much more than just that. She's also investigating the case and supporting our client and empowering our client. Our client had already, people have talked about, including their clients as a member of their team. Well, she was her team for about a year and without anybody else around her. And we kind of filled in the gaps around her and lifted her up where we could, because she was, as April pointed out, already making progress on her case plan goals. But right away, I think the both of us kind of put our heads together and we said, well, wait, none of this, when we look at this case, we see something very different than what all the court filings say and all of the conversations we had with the agency caseworkers were giving us. And we started changing the narrative to the way we saw it almost immediately. And we did that in all sorts of ways. It wasn't just like in court filings, although we can get to that. We got to that point eventually, but in conversations with caseworkers, in conversations with service providers, in conversations with the lawyers for the agency, we just totally flipped it around. And I wanted to file a motion immediately when I heard the facts of this case to get this child reunified with our client. Unfortunately, there are a number of reasons why we did not do that. We ultimately did, but I'll kind of let April talk a little bit through the progress of this case in the middle ground there.
Yeah, so my investigation was kicked in. I think we got like 2 minutes, Alex. So I talked to the visitation coach, her program, her IOB program, the foster parent, and pretty much anybody who had anything to do with the case to try to figure out, one, their take on mom's progress and what she's doing. And almost everyone I spoke to about mom had a positive comment about it. Like, she is clearly someone who has loved her child and still do. So with that, I'm collecting progress reports and anything else I can put my hands on and sending it over to Alex. We're having conference calls, Alex and I, with keep people within the case and outside of the case. We're having conferences with the foster parent and our client to ensure that relationship and to keep that relationship open. Alex did so much inside and out of court. I think we both pretty much took on a lot of things outside our roles.
One thing I would add is April really developed a record to support the narrative that we thought this case was about. It wasn't like we made this up. This was our client's experience, and eventually that led to me filing a motion to reunify this child, which told that narrative. But it told it with supporting exhibits, like affidavits from her visitation caseworker, who worked for the same agency that wanted to terminate her rights, but was saying, I don't know why my superiors are doing this. Essentially, she has the strongest bond I could ever imagine with her daughter, and vice versa. And then we got, that wasn't it. There was a series of sort of affidavits and case records that we produced. And we challenged the narrative. We challenged whether this would happen to a differently situated family, and whether or not this was actually abuse to begin with. We didn't relitigate it, that question, but we raised it sort of tangentially. And we're still fighting. Our motion was denied, but it did change the narrative, and the agency, ever since we filed that motion and started talking about this case differently, has basically said we're not terminating this parent's rights. There are other roadblocks, and I will say having a holistic model that also includes social workers, and this is to the point of the last presentation and to Antoinette's role. At this point now, there are these competing narratives, which essentially are that our client traumatized her daughter 2 years ago in this household accident, and she needs to apologize for it through trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is all totally focused on punishing our client and not supporting a trauma narrative with this child. So we actually brought in one of our social workers, who has clinical background, to take a look at it. And she then helped us connect with a professor at a local university who had experience with TFCBT, who said that's not what TFCBT is for, who connected us to a practitioner who wrote very similarly to what Antoinette did in the case that they just talked about, an expert report, which basically says this child was never appropriate for TFCBT, and actually what is appropriate is for this child to be reunified with her mother. Not someone who works at our unit or in our office, and we haven't done that much of defense sort of expert or the defense social worker expert work. It's a really interesting idea. So this person actually works for a different agency, but it's very similar to what Antoinette was raising. But all the while, I would also say that while all this is happening, we have developed such a good rapport with our client, and have just, April has supported her in so many ways, and it's just a very happy relationship, despite the trauma that is constantly being imposed upon her.
Thank you so much, April. I would just ask all the panelists to come back on screen so we can say our goodbyes. And while we're doing that, I would just like to thank everyone for joining us in this very important discussion. I hope this is not the first, and I hope this is not going to be the last. But one of the things that I will say is I'm hearing a lot of people talk about service plans. And one thing to take away is that parents have voice and choice. And I've heard that throughout the stories. So when we're talking about service plans, just advocating and pushing for our parents' voices and our parents' needs to be reflected in those service plans, because these are their children that they're fighting for. And you guys are all doing such an amazing job and being those advocates. And I heard so many people say what a privilege it was to be involved, and what a privilege it was for our clients and our parents to trust us with such precious things, the most precious things in the world, right? Their children. And we know how impactful all of our voices are, but the fact that we're all choosing to wake up every day and do this work for the people who need us the most is something that, you know, as an impacted parent, I cannot thank every single last one of you enough for. This has been amazing. And like I said, I really hope this is not the last time that we all are together.
Thank you, Teora, so much for being the moderator, and for all of our speakers. Thank you very, very much. I can see with the chat that people are feeling inspired, being ready to go back to their offices, their virtual offices in some cases, to really lift up the voices of parents. You've all done an amazing job of honoring the families that you serve and honoring the teams that you come from and work for. It has been an honor to watch 7 interdisciplinary teams being represented. And I think, this has just been a highlight of our webinar series. And I thank you all. And for all of our participants, thank you for joining us today. We are recording this and it will be posted on the ABA website. So if you want to share with your colleagues who weren't able to come today, we'd be very happy for you to do so. So thank you all very, very much.
See you guys.